Well, welcome to the 700 Club. Congress is moving ahead with funding to ramp up the war in Afghanistan, but they're still leaving out the money President Obama wants to start moving detainees from Guantanamo Bay.
That comes after the president argued that his way is the best way to fight the war on terror. And as Jennifer Wishon reports, former Vice President Cheney didn't let that claim go unanswered.
This federal prison complex in Florence, Colorado, known as Supermax, is home to criminals like shoe bomber Richard Reed and Unabomber Ted Kaczynski, and it soon could be home to suspected terrorists currently being held at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba.
The existence of Guantanamo likely created more terrorists around the world than it ever detained.
President Obama says the very existence of Gitmo threatens America's moral authority in the world, and that those who've broken federal laws will be tried in U.S. courts.
I think the president will find upon reflection that to bring the worst of the worst terrorists inside the United States would be cause for great danger and regret in the years to come.
We will safeguard what we must to protect the American people, but we will also ensure the accountability and oversight that is the hallmark of our constitutional system.
During his national security speech at the National Archive, President Obama was met with applause as he emphasized his decision to ban enhanced interrogation techniques, a decision former Vice President Dick Cheney, one of Obama's most outspoken critics, is painting as naive. Cheney says to call interrogation methods used under the Bush administration torture is casting terrorists and murderers as innocent victims.
You've heard endlessly about waterboarding. It happened to 3 terrorists. One of them was Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the mastermind of 9/11, who's also boasted about his beheading of Daniel Pearl.
As Cheney and Obama sparred over the future of prisoners plucked off the battlefield, the Senate approved a $91 billion military spending bill, legislation that closely mirrors the president's request, minus the $80 million he wants to start shutting down Gitmo. Lawmakers say they still need details about how Americans will be protected aside terrorists on U.S. soil. Jennifer Wishon, CBN News, Capitol Hill.
Well, I imagine this debate's going to go on a long time, but underlying the reason Guantanamo was used as a facility was it was outside the United States and theoretically outside the jurisdiction of the U.S. courts. If you take those same prisoners and move them to the United States, and the administration, President Obama has already admitted that there are people in that prison who can never be tried and can never be released. Well, in the United States, as soon as you hit the soil, you get rights. And one of those rights is you can't be held without a trial. So how is he going to get around that? What is the legal framework? We've got to look back. What was the reason this thing was created? It was created as a military prison to hold military prisoners. And if you bring them to the United States, all that goes away. And how do you create a framework? Right now, there isn't one. And so before we start moving things around and trying to close a symbol, which it's certainly turned into, how do you deal with the very real threat that those people will pose to us and the very real, the reality that a lawyer will represent them and say, you can't hold them under the Constitution. Now, the other issue is if we start messing around with our constitutional protections for a specific class of detainee, who's to say now that you fit that class? If we start changing that in some kind of attempt to maintain our security, well, we're going to get in trouble here. I hope there's very careful deliberation and what are we going to do and what is the framework. And I'm very pleased that the U.S. Senate is saying, wait a minute, we've really got to look at this closely. Lee Webb has the rest of our top stories from the CBN Newsroom. Lee?
Gordon, House Republicans say they will continue to question Speaker Nancy Pelosi's claim that the CIA lied to her about their interrogation methods. Then after House Democrats rejected a Republican resolution for a bipartisan probe of Pelosi's claim. Pelosi says she was misled by the CIA about waterboarding used during the Bush administration. Minority Leader John Boehner says Pelosi's charge is serious and must be investigated. House Democrats, though, say the GOP's probe is aimed at changing the focus from whether the Bush administration used torture methods. A group of House lawmakers and Christian pastors is trying to preserve traditional marriage in the nation's capital. They're introducing the D.C. Defense of Marriage Act. It states, quote, "In the District of Columbia, for all legal purposes, marriage means the union of one man and one woman."
I got into politics, never intended to back in 1994, to focus on doing what's best for families. That's the key institution in our culture. The strength of that institution ultimately determines the strength of our entire society, and that's what this measure is about.
The move would counter a recent city council vote in D.C. Recognizing same-sex marriages from other states. Congress has the authority, though, to weigh in before any new D.C. laws take effect. Despite rising gas prices, more than 32 million Americans will hit the road this holiday weekend. That's up 1.5% from last year. Experts say it's due to lower prices at hotels and tourist attractions. And even though gas prices have been rising, they're still $1.44 lower than they were this time last year. Auto lender GMAC is getting another $7.5 billion in aid from the federal government. It failed its bank stress test earlier in the month. The Treasury Department says the investment will help provide a reliable source of financing for car dealers and buyers. Treasury Secretary Timothy Geithner said the loan should help boost the economy. Gordon?
Well, I know for you and for me, we're not going to get any kind of federal bailout. It's just not going to happen for us. And many of us are facing issues that are very serious. Some of us are unemployed. The unemployment rate highest in 25 years. Some of us are afraid of our industries, the companies we work for. Are we going to be next in the unemployment line? And where is our federal bailout? If you're like most Americans, your retirement fund has been cut in half. Where do we go? What do we do? Well, today we're going to have some good news for you because God is able to bail you out if you will only follow the principles that He's laid out. He can turn your situation around.